Hello?
Hello?
Who's this? What's your name?
Well, what's your name?
Well, I'm Bryson.
What are you doing, Bryson?
I'm just getting ready to talk about a scary movie.
Oh, do you like scary movies?
I do like scary movies. I think they're pretty fun.
Then I just have one last question. What's your favorite scary movie?
No. I am the father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson, and today we are actually talking about two movies because I went and saw two last week. So we are going to be first talking about Shazam 2. I believe it's Shazam Fury of the Gods. I think that's what its official title is. I just call it Shazam 2. And then we're talking about Scream 6. But we're going to talk about that one last because we're saving the best for last because I preferred that movie over Shazam, quite honestly. But yeah, it was great. So last week I got to go see two movies, both of which were actually sequels. And so it was kind of interesting the way we could do those. Is that what I meant? That we have had so many sequels lately. I think that's become a really large trend, is that movies don't ever just end with one. It's usually that there's a sequel. Something will come of the original. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's kind of bad. In the case of Shazam 2, I would say it is just all right. I really liked the original Shazam, and if you haven't watched the Shazam movies, I'm kind of surprised, but at least the first one, it is about this kid who gets powers from a wizard. Basically, if he says Shazam, he transforms into a superhero, and in that movie, he has to defeat the 7 deadly sins, and eventually he gives the powers to his family as well. And so they can all be Shazam. It's great. But so in the second movie, you have the villains, which are the daughters of Atlas, and they are annoyed that the wizard sealed off the god realm from magic, and so they couldn't go to the human world anymore, and that kind of sucked. And so they were a bit annoyed, and Shazam and like all the Shazam kids, they were given powers of the gods. It's the speed of someone. I'm trying to remember. Oh yeah, so it's the wisdom of Solomon, the strength of Zeus, or it's the strength of Atlas, the lightning of Zeus, the speed of Achilles, Shazam, Hercules, something. I can't remember all of them, but that's okay. But so anyways, they have the powers of the gods, essentially, and that's why they can transform and they can fight mythical beings. And being that the daughters of Atlas also use magic, that makes the Shazam kids more vulnerable. And so the movie is basically following them just trying to defeat the daughters of Atlas, and they're trying to steal the Shazam family's powers, and because they want to restore the realm of the gods, whereas in the end they do restore the realm of the gods. However, they also try to take over Earth, and they try to bring a tree of life to the world of Earth, which would take them over and bring monsters like manticores and cyclops and whatever kind of mythical monsters you can think of, and apparently unicorns as well, which are vicious in this movie, and they taste Skittles, they taste the rainbow, and they turn all nice, which is hilarious. But yeah, it's not like a terrible movie. I don't think Shazam 2 was exactly terrible. However, I did notice this with the first one, and I noticed it with this one as well. Shazam was more of a Marvel style DC movie. And what I mean by that is they are definitely more like the quirky, like quick-witted type stuff that you hear in a lot of Marvel movies. It's more catering to family audiences. And I think that does work well with the first Shazam. And it should have worked for the sequel. However, it just felt like more of the same. And I think maybe that's just kind of some superhero fatigue going on a little bit, because the superhero genre is just kind of being that way. They're all very formulaic now, and so it's kind of hard to really get excited about those kind of movies now, which kind of sucks because I like them. I like Spider-Man, I like Iron Man, Batman, Superman. I think they're all cool, but I think with DC especially, they're trying to make some of their movies be like Marvel movies, but not all of their heroes are like Marvel heroes. Typically, Marvel heroes and DC heroes vary on how their powers are received. I think one YouTube channel that I really like, Cosmonaut Variety Hour, Marcus from that, he explains it very well. He says that DC superheroes typically get their powers through being born with them or through cultivating them with training. Think Superman, he was born a Kryptonian, he was transported to Earth, and now he's super strength. Diana, Wonder Woman, is just naturally a god. The Flash is a bit of an exception because his was kind of an accident, but you also have Batman and like the whole Bat family, which all their powers, quote unquote, because they're not really powers, they're just ninjas, is all cultivated through training. And then Marvel heroes usually get their powers by accident. Even the ones where they kind of go through training, it was not their intention to become a superhero, but they worked with what they got, and now they are. Steve Rogers, he was just a good person. He was given a super soldier serum and became a superhero. Spider-Man was bit by a radioactive spider. Tony Stark was kidnapped, built himself a suit to get out, and then decided to use that to help protect the world. And so these are two different kind of stories. Typically, Marvel heroes see their powers as a curse, and they're trying to make the best of them. Whereas DC heroes, they are born with them, and so they kind of are just like whatever. They are gods among men, essentially. And so with that comes different types of storytelling. Lately, I feel like in DC, we have been seeing more darker stories, and I think that works for DC because that's more the kind of stories that fit those gods among men type characters, because they're already super powerful beings, so you have to put them up against super powerful beings. You typically notice in like Marvel movies, they are usually fighting people who are kind of like them, who may have gotten their powers by accident, or they are trying to copy powers, and that's what makes those characters interesting, because they're typically fighting regular people. They're not usually fighting super beings. They are all kind of just normal people with superpowers. And then in DC movies, it's usually gods fighting gods. And that is exactly the case for Shazam 2, because it's these children with god powers fighting literal gods. And so it makes it kind of different when it's more of a Marvel style. I think that does work a little bit for the Shazam ones because of them kind of getting the powers sort of by accident. Like they're kind of just like good kids, and so they're given the powers to help like protect people. And so I think it's very similar to Marvel style, and it should work for Shazam, and I think it worked as an origin story. I think things could have gotten a little bit more serious with the second movie. And that may just be me, but I think it would have been better had they not made as many quippy jokes. But It's kind of just me. I don't know. They all do fantastic performances. I think all the actors are great. I really like Asher Angel and Zachary Levi, especially because I have a picture with them because I met them at FanX one year. It was great. They are awesome people. I think they're super fun. And I think they're good actors for sure. I just think DC needs to definitely do their own thing. And I think they're sort of starting to get that groove. But then we usually have a lot of studio interference, and that makes things really hard because then you're not really letting creative vision flow. And that's usually when these stories come out best. Take Marvel movies, for example. They are usually created by people that know the source material and know how it works. DC usually starts off that way, and then studio interference happens, and they're like, no, we want it more like Marvel. We want people to like it and have fun and make it more family movies, but that's not really what DC is. Typically, they're darker stories. Even Batman. Although Batman is a protector of life, they are more brutal villains and characters. You think the Joker, he's a psychopath that just murders people. You have Scarecrow, which injects fear toxin into people to make them see their worst nightmares. You have the Court of Owls, which is almost like a cult. It's that kind of stuff that makes it interesting because he's dealing with the worst of humanity, and that's a darker story. Typically, Marvel villains are usually people more down on their luck or trying to get ahead in life, and they're choosing just the wrong path, whereas DC villains are usually wrong from the get-go. And so I think they're just different types of stories, and so having a sequel to a movie that was sort of like a Marvel movie, have it still be the Marvel style, doesn't exactly work, at least for me. I don't know, maybe you really like Shazam 2 if you've seen it. I liked it. I did think it was fun. I don't know if I'll see it again, at least in the theater. I'll probably watch it for sure when it comes out on streaming, but I'm not amped up to go see it again. But yeah. So next, Scream 6. I got to go see that one as well. And keep in mind, so I am a big horror fan. I do feel like I really like horror movies. However, I had only seen the first 2 Scream movies once each before seeing Scream 6. I hadn't seen any of the other Scream movies. I still haven't seen 4, but I've seen all the rest. So it was kind of interesting to see it and not have the full context of everything, but like understanding like the basic premise, and it was interesting. I liked it. It has my girl Jenna Ortega. Girl, I'm available, please. But yeah, it's a good movie. I really liked it. I noticed this because I binged the rest of the Scream movies over this last week so that I could talk about this a little bit better. Scream kind of revitalized the slasher genre. So typically a slasher is usually just like a movie about a serial killer, essentially. And so you think like Friday the 13th, Freddy Krueger, Halloween, those are slasher type movies. It's just kind of like serial killer stuff. And this franchise kind of revived the slasher genre, really. And typically that is because they have a lot of meta commentary, which means they are usually calling out tropes from horror movies while actively doing them in the movie. So they are very self-aware and kind of like almost fourth wall breaking a little bit, which makes it really fun. And in these movies specifically, after the events of the first movie, so they make a book, like one of the characters makes a book talking about the murders that then becomes a movie, which in the films are the Stab franchise, which are essentially just the Scream movies, which is great because they can kind of just reference them. And so they make jokes, especially in this like sixth one. They're like, we are now a franchise. This means that legacy characters, people who have shown up before, may not live they are free game. They can die. They can get hurt. Anything can happen. They can be the killer. In fact, it may be more likely that they are the killer now rather than anyone new. And so I do like that this series has been calling out those tropes. In like the first movie, they definitely talk about how you shouldn't have sex in a film, because if you do that, you're almost guaranteed to die. You shouldn't just split up. Don't do that. That's a stupid idea in a horror movie, because you know you're going to die. Or say, I'll be right back. That usually means they're about to die too. You don't separate. And I really like this trope of calling out what you shouldn't be doing, especially like in the first Scream movie and the fifth one. They are watching horror movies. There are these two scenes that are kind of like very parallel to each other, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. But so in the scenes, these two characters, in the first one it's Randy, in the fifth, it's one of the new characters. I don't remember her freaking name. Is it Missy? That is probably wrong. I don't know. I cannot remember. But so they are watching horror movies. And while watching, they're like, turn around. The character is right behind you. Why aren't you noticing them? Why don't you hear them? While in like their setting, the person who's the murderer is right behind them. In the first one, he gets distracted and then leaves. He doesn't kill the person watching the movie. In the fifth one, the person watching the movie realizes, hang on, we're basically in that. And so they turn around and see the killer, and then they have to get away, which I thought was such an interesting parallel, because they are actively calling it out. And another example is, so in the sixth movie and the fifth, they talk about requels and franchises. And so a requel, if you didn't know what a requel is, so typically nowadays you don't reboot series all that often. You usually, to kind of service the fans as well as create new material, you tie things back to the original story while starting to create something new. Think the new Halloween trilogy, Jurassic World, Star Wars, with like the sequel trilogy, and now you have Scream. So you are essentially soft rebooting while still connecting to the previous series. So you can have like legacy characters like Sydney from the original film Scream is in the fifth one. And I'm trying to think, is there anyone in the sixth? And then Gail Weathers, who is like the news reporter, she's been in all of them. And so they are actively kind of calling these things out, which I really like that they do. I do think it's interesting that they can acknowledge these tropes that are happening while still making them fun movies. In fact, a lot of people really like the fifth Scream and the sixth because they kind of acknowledge it while also still being a new trilogy, essentially. And so it makes it more compelling because there's new characters, but you're still tying back to the original source material. And I think that makes for a very engaging story because now you can be a nostalgic fan and like the new stuff. Sometimes that doesn't always work with some series. I feel like the people who like Jurassic World do like Jurassic Park, but not everyone who likes Jurassic Park likes Jurassic World, or people who like the original Star Wars movies don't like the prequels, and sometimes the sequels. It's very common that the sequels especially have been getting a lot of hate, which I don't understand because I think they're fine. They're not like terrible movies. They're not great, but technically neither were the original Star Wars movies, but I may get some hate for that as a movie reviewer, but that's okay. But so it allows for new and old audiences to continue. And they also call out that they're now a franchise, because that's true. They've expanded upon the original storyline. They are not just about the original Sidney Prescott, who was like the main focus of the 4 other movies, I think. I think she's the main focus in 4. Once again, I haven't seen that one, but it's like that. They do bring her back for the 5th movie, but they don't in the 6th. But so they announced that it's a franchise. They're beyond the original story now. They have a TV show, I believe, which I don't know much about, but I know there's a TV show about that is titled Scream, and I don't think it's on a direct correlation with the movies, but I know it's like still kind of based off that stuff. But then you now have the new trilogy, well, the new 2 movies, the duology. They may make a 3rd one, I would assume. Yeah, they will. But so typically now they're a bigger brand. They can do different things because they're a franchise now. And even new characters can just chop them off. They can immediately go. And so in the 6th movie, they even make the new characters, because you do kind of suspect usually new characters that come in to be the killer. And by the way, spoiler alert, I should put this at the beginning of every episode. I'll have to re-record one. In this movie, it's the new people that are the killers. Like, it's kind of obvious, because it's a cop and his like 2 kids. And so, of course, they're the killers, okay? Like, obviously. Like, you kind of see it. Like, you're kind of like, they could be the killers. I think that's who it's going to be. And then they film it in situations where you're like, oh, maybe not. And then you're constantly going, there has to be more than one killer. Of course there is, because how else could they do these things minutes apart from each other? And so I really like that. And I like the ghost face design. I think the serial killer for him is very simple, and I do like that he talks. I like the Halloween movies. I don't exactly like that Michael Myers, he's quiet. Like, he's just like the strong, silent type, essentially. I don't necessarily care for that. I kind of like when the villains talk a little bit. And usually when the murders are happening, Ghostface isn't usually talking. But that's because mainly when he's talking is over a phone, and he uses the voice modulator, and he's like, do you like scary movies? I'll show. What's your favorite scary movie? Oh, wrong answer, and things like that. And he uses that as like his main like threatening tactic, which I really like. But usually in person, they're not doing that. Usually it's them being quiet, or sometimes they do have the voice modulator thing in person, but it's not as often. And I like that because it adds a level of detail that you don't always realize, because they have to use a voice modulator. They're not going to be talking in person as much because that could give them away, because having to hold it up, that would make it harder for them to try and kill somebody. But being able to do that over the phone makes it really good at being intimidating, because they're being watched, and that's like a really big fear for a lot of people. It can target everybody. No one really likes the feeling of being watched when they don't know who it is. They can't recognize that they're being watched. Like, they know they're being watched, but I think you're getting what I'm saying. They don't know who it is. They don't know where it is. They don't know what could happen from them being watched. And that definitely plays a huge part in this movie series, is because the killer usually is someone they know, or someone related to them in some capacity or the other. And so you know that the villain knows a lot. They are smart, or trying to be, and they plan out their murders. They plan out what they're going to do. They plan out where they can be. And it makes that really interesting because they're not just acting senselessly. Typically, these characters have very complex minds. Even if they're psychotic, they think a lot. And I think for a villain, that is one of the best ways to write a villain, because I don't want a villain to just be acting out of anger and aggression. And sometimes they do in these movies, but most of the time it is all about how they think and can fool the characters, and they can fool the audience, because you may think it's one character or another, or you're seeing a lot of things that point to this character. You're like, yeah, that is definitely them. And then another character comes out and you're like, it was them. How could it be them? But they were exhibiting all these traits. Like, I think in the second Scream, you have Cotton Weary, who was originally arrested and put in jail for the murder of Sidney Prescott's mother. And so everyone thought it was her, it was him. And then he gets out and he's in the second movie and the ghost face is back. And you think he could be back for revenge. And there are often times where he's angry and he kind of lashes out, and you think it could be him. It could be Cotton, and he has probable cause. He was framed for murder. He was testified against by Sidney because she thought it was him. And so you then get that, like, okay, it's definitely him. And then you have two characters that come out that you didn't even expect. You have one who's a friend of her boyfriend. Not kind of shocking. I feel like it's always related to the boyfriend. Scream 5 really makes sense of that. And 6, really, because in those ones, in Scream 5, it's the new character's boyfriend. And the new character, his name is Samantha, I think. Yeah, Samantha Carpenter. And she's the daughter of Billy Loomis, who is the original Scream villain. He's the original Ghostface. He's the original killer. Him and Stu Macher. And then, so yeah, it's her boyfriend who is the murder. And she's been having some like psychotic episodes in Scream 5. And so it's very possible that it could be her and she just doesn't know. And it turns out to just be her boyfriend, Richie something or other. I don't know. He's the same guy who plays Huey in The Boys. He's great. And then in Scream 6, it's his family actually that end up being the killers. And they didn't realize that they were family. And so it's kind of interesting. I like how these movies think a lot about their script. They think a lot about their villains and their characters, and they make them very complex, and they make it a mystery as to who it is, and even try and throw you off a lot of times. And I think that's such a good way to do a horror film, and kind of like in this slasher serial killer type way, because it's a classic whodunit kind of story mixed with some scary elements that are very complex, and they're very self-aware of all these tropes and ideas. They know that they're doing them, and they actively call them out using their characters. And I love that Scream 6 continues this, and that the whole franchise of Scream does this. I think it's the best way to do a horror movie, and I think it's a better way to do sequels than we've typically seen before. They call this out, especially in the second Scream. They're like, hey, Shrek 2, better than the original Shrek. Not all sequels are worse. And I think that is definitely the case for these movies. I think the third Scream was all right, but I like the first two. I like 5 and 6. I need to see 4. I've heard that one is actually kind of good, though. And so basically, from what is happening is that these are kind of the right way to do sequels. You don't have to just make it a cash grab. You can still put a lot of thought and care and intrigue into your project and still make it a really good sequel that can still kind of stand alone. I watched Scream 6 without seeing Scream 5, and I still understood a lot of what was going on. They were able to kind of give enough backstory so that if you didn't see it, you could know and still be able to connect with the current story that is going on. And I think that's a really good way to do sequels compared to Shazam 2, which although it's kind of entertaining, it doesn't exactly work without watching the original, and it doesn't have a fitting tone almost. It feels like it should have progressed a little bit, but it hadn't. But Scream has continued progressing and trying to stay relevant and thoughtful with their movies. And I think that is why Scream kind of did their sequels better. And although I liked both of them, I definitely liked Scream. And I even did the voice modulator thing myself here at the beginning of the episode. So it was great. And so, yeah, those two movies, they definitely make you easily entertained. And so that's it for this episode. I hope you really enjoyed listening about Shazam, Fury of the Gods, and Scream 6, and that you'll tune back in for the next episode. But until that time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Easily Entertained with me, your host, Bryson. If you enjoyed, be sure to tune back in Tuesdays at 5 p.m. at Mountain Standard Time on all platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever the heck you get your podcasts. And if you want more updates on all the latest in entertainment, join us on social media: Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. We're all on there for all the latest updates on entertainment. And until next time, this is Easily Entertained.